Welcome to Property Mama Adventures in Real Estate, episode 28. It's here where we share all of the shenanigans that go on in the real estate industry that I have seen in almost 3 decades of buying and selling real estate. If I've not met before, my name is Wendy Chamberlain and I am a buyer's advocate, a buyer's agent here in Melbourne, Australia. Each week here on the podcast, I share bits and pieces that have gone on that week or that month or recently. And today I wanted to share with you auction tactics and getting ready for auction and what you need to do in order to get ready to go along to an auction. So Melbourne certainly is an auction town, as is Sydney, and auctions conducted here in Melbourne are much, much more different to other places that you might attend an auction. And so there are some due diligence steps that you need to do in the lead up to attending an auction, and the process itself of going along and bidding is also different as well. Buying at auction is different to negotiating the purchase of a property. So negotiating a property purchase can be a slower process. There's also different steps that you take when something is for sale by negotiation. So there's lots of different ways that a property might be offered for sale. Auctioning is just one of them. There are other ways such as private sale, sale by set date, expression of interest, off-market or secret listings or pocket listings, which are offering a home for sale that's not advertised. And there's also what I call pre-market listings, which are listings that are getting ready to be brought onto the market, but potentially through your various relationships with real estate agents, you might be actually able to secure the property that way. So it's all very interesting. And you need to understand exactly what is going on for that property being sold at that point in time to know how best to approach it. So how best to basically your plan of attack so that if that's the property you want to buy, you're the one that's going to be handed the keys and it's going to be your new home. So negotiating, there are a number of steps with it, and speaking to the real estate agent, you're going to better understand what is going to get the deal over the line for you. There's going to be various factors that you've got to consider, one of which is the price, but it's not just about the price. And that's where negotiating comes in. So if we look at auctions pretty much end up being about the price, unless it's going to be sold beforehand, which does happen in some circumstances. But in a lot of other circumstances, if a property is not going to be sold prior to the auction, you need to know what the due diligence steps are that you need to have lined up in order to be prepared to be there on auction day. Here in Melbourne, we don't have to register in order to go along and bid. And I believe that in the past, it's probably one of the reasons that there was a lot of dummy bidding that used to happen, and they have changed the laws here in Victoria so that there's what's called vendor bidding that the auctioneer can put forward to the audience, to the buyers that are standing there on the street. And one of the main reasons that has come about is because literally auctioneers used to go, yep, okay, and they would take offers out of trees, parked cars, whatever it was. And you standing there on the street as a buyer looking to buy that property, you had no idea where, because if there's a crowd of people, let's say you're on the street, you're bidding, wanting to bid at auction for this property, and there's a crowd of 60, 70, like over 100 people I've seen on some circumstances for certain properties. Not everybody is there to bid. Some people are just wanting to find out how it goes. There might be neighbours, they're just curious. But you don't know, as a person rolling up to bid on that property, you don't know who the bidders are and who the bidders are not. Now, I've become pretty good at scanning the crowd and being able to pick who I think are the people that are going to bid. But I've been doing this for a long time. Most people who are just bidding the first time in 5 years, 10 years, however long it's been for you, if it's not your wheelhouse, you're not going to have the confidence. It's like honing the skill. Even anybody listening, you're really good at whatever your zone of genius is. And if it's not going to an auction and bidding to buy a property, well, that's where you need to employ the services of an expert like myself, like our advocates here at Chamberlain, property advocates, because it's what we do. We've been doing it for many, many years. And just as people say, being able to read a room, we can read a crowd, and we know who is likely to bid. But more than that, once the auction starts, you need to understand what kind of strategy to employ, because people sometimes ask me, saying, "Oh, what's your auction strategy? What do you normally do?" It doesn't work like that. What I do is I see what is going on. I read the play. The auctioneer at each auction is going to be different. If it's the same auctioneer, he's going to run it differently based on who the buyers are there, the price of the property, location of the property, the demographic, the likely buyers. There's all kinds of scenarios. What's going on in the market at that point in time, what interest rates are doing, have been doing, because all of these are minute things that all play into how an auction may play out. Same with standing there as a buyer. You need to be able to work out when people start bidding, when do you start bidding? Do you start the bidding off, or do you jump in later? Do you wait for things to warm up? Do you wait for things to start slowing down? Do you need to start slowing the auction down? How do you do that? How do you bid to slow an auction down? These are all of the things that come into play when it's basically game day, the auction has started, and you're standing there looking to buy a property. But let's take it back to the week leading up to the auction, because there are some due diligence steps you need to be doing to make sure you're prepared to be able to put your hand in the air and start bidding to buy a property. Number one is you need to understand what kind of settlement period the vendor is looking for. This is going to differ no matter where you are based, anywhere where you're buying property. So the settlement period is the day on which the contracts get exchanged and the ownership of the home goes from the seller to the buyer. So if you're bidding on a property, it's the date that you're now going to be purchasing the property, the settlement date where money is exchanged. So it's at that point in time, you need to have lined up your money sources. So most people are buying real estate via getting a loan. So having organised that is something you do. But that's down the track. What you need to have done for you to show up on the auction day is to make sure you have your deposit monies available. So how much is that? What is the auctioneer, the real estate agent looking for? Because that's another question you need to have asked and covered off before the day of the auction. There's no point confirming all of these things for the first time on the day of the auction when it's 15 minutes before the whole thing starts, because you're not being fair on the auctioneer or the real estate agent or the vendor for them having to make those decisions, because auctions can be, particularly for the vendor, for the person selling the property, auctions are highly emotional. And I have seen that it is far more emotional for the seller oftentimes than it is for the buyer. Because if you think about the person selling the property, the chances are that they've lived there for some time, they've got lots of family memories there, they might have brought their first baby home to that property, they might have had their family grow up and have all the milestones in that property, or it could even be the other side of things where they're selling their parents' home and the parents have passed away, and it's hugely emotional for people. So you need to get all of these questions answered in the lead up, in that week, if not earlier, to the auction. So settlement, what kind of settlement is the vendor after? And this depends on what the circumstances are for the vendor. It's not always the same. It's very much case by case. And I always say this when I'm talking to people, everybody is different. Every buyer is different. Every seller is different. Every scenario is very much case by case. So some people want a quicker settlement, i.e. they want to get their money faster. And it particularly is the case where a property is vacant, or where they've got a renter in there, a tenant in place, and it's an investment and they're just looking to basically get their money out and do something else as quickly as possible. So then they will want a shorter settlement. If the property is owner occupied, if the person living there still has to take action and buy another home or work out their accommodation or find somewhere else that they wish to buy, then they're often wanting a 90-day or a 120-day settlement, like a longer settlement, because they haven't got anywhere to go and they need to sort that out once they know that their property is sold. And some people like to do it that way when they're selling because they know what they're then shopping with. They know what their budget is to shop for their next home. So they want a longer settlement. It just helps with the moving process. We've got a client at the moment who is in that absolute position we've just managed to sell the property, and it's a longer 90-day settlement because they have to work out their next step in finding their next accommodation. So it's not unusual, but it is very much individual to where you are. In other states of Australia, there seem to be set settlement dates that happen, but everything is negotiable if you have a conversation with all the parties involved. That's why I'm saying you need to be having these conversations before the auction date. So settlement is one thing. Another thing you need to understand is payment of the deposit. So in Victoria, when an auction takes place and it is sold to the buyer, and let's say it's you, they will take you inside and you will be required to pay a deposit. Usually it's 10%. It's usually 10%, but it can differ from wherever you are. But there needs to be some sort of monetary exchange in order for the contract to become legal and binding. And this is where you need to have had that conversation with the real estate agent to understand, what does it need to be? Does it need to be the 10%? Can it be less than the 10%? Can it be another amount? If you're happy to pay the 10% and you have that available, all good. But sometimes clients we work with, particularly first-time buyers, they may not have a 10% deposit available in funds to provide on the day of an auction. So we can sometimes negotiate another amount. 5% is not uncommon because the basic facts are people are generally not going to walk away from a 5% deposit because we're talking probably $50,000 plus. And most people are not going to walk away from that. But it absolutely is up to the vendor to be on board with that and want to do that. Last week we were talking to a real estate agent about a property that was going to auction, and the situation there were the couple were separating, so it was a divorce situation, and so they wanted the property sold. So in those circumstances, our client wanted to only pay a 5% deposit, and they wanted a longer settlement so that they could organise to get their house sold. The vendor, which is their prerogative, said no, they didn't want to just take a 5% deposit. They wanted to do a 10% deposit because they had spoken to their solicitor, and for whatever reason, their lawyer had suggested to them that they do take a 10% deposit, which is their prerogative to do, and they wanted a shorter settlement because they wanted their money faster, because a settlement period is where the balance of the funds are paid. So it's not going to suit people necessarily to wait all of that time. So all of these factors you need to be asking to make sure that your circumstances are respected and protected. But it's a two-way street. You've got to also respect what the vendor is looking for. So you've got to ask these questions. All of this is happening before you've even got to the auction day. They're the main ones. We always suggest to our clients to get a building and pest inspection done for an auction. That has to be happening before. You cannot do it. Well, you can do it after the auction, but all you're doing is getting a to-do list because you've already bought the property. So if you're not sure, you need to get these things done before the auction. And then based on that, you make a decision about whether or not you're attending the auction. They're the main things that you need to consider. Getting a contract checked is probably the final one that I would suggest. Get your contract checked because we often see that they are missing pieces of paperwork, or there are questions that are raised by the legal representative that we need answered. Oftentimes it is quite simple and straightforward for the vendor's legal representative to provide that paperwork, and we get that box checked and it's all good to go. But if something is missing, or if something has been flagged and you're not comfortable with it, or your legal representative has given you some advice that it's probably something that you don't want to enter into a contract on, you need to know that, because auction day, when the hammer comes down, you are buying that property. So these things are all factors. So get that all organised in the lead up. It can happen the day before, but just be aware that where, for example, you needed to source some paperwork, you've got to allow time for the parties to get what it is that you need. And this can take a day or two. So if you're asking all this stuff at 4 o'clock on a Friday for an auction that's happening the next day, you're not likely to have a great result there of getting what you need. So prepare ahead of time and get this stuff sorted. So let's look at now at the auction day. So here in Melbourne, if an auction is, let's say auction's at 12 noon, the property is generally open 30 minutes beforehand. And we don't have a requirement here to register to bid at the auction. Other states of Australia do. In New South Wales, you register, you get given a little paddle that you raise in the air for an auction. We don't have that here in Melbourne, which makes things a little bit tricky in relation to showing up as a buyer, knowing who else is your competition. Because clearly, if you're standing on the street and everyone else has a paddle, you know who potentially is going to bid. We don't have that. You've got to actually scan the crowd and make a decision about who do you think is going to be your competition to buy this particular property. I know that some real estate agents do ask people attending their auctions to register. It's not mandatory, and if they didn't do it, they probably couldn't do much about it because it's not the law here. But it does a couple of things which are very, very helpful in the psyche of the buyer. If you're registered to go along to bid at an auction, the likelihood is that you're going to show up and you're going to, even if you don't end up bidding, because you've registered, you're likely to show up. So what it does psychologically, it prompts you as the buyer to actually follow through on what you've said. So it's actually quite a clever tactic of the real estate agent. Get some commitment. They've got commitment from the buyer to show up on the day of the auction. Because let me tell you, buyers say they're coming along and they don't show up. Buyers say they're not coming, they're not interested, and they show up. I don't know what goes on with people. We hear in the real estate industry about agents that are dodgy or not doing the right thing, and absolutely there are real estate agents that give the industry a bad name. Absolutely. But the vast majority of real estate agents are great at what they do. They do a fabulous job. And they're having to deal with buyers who are telling them one thing and then doing completely the opposite. So it's not always on the real estate agent about saying, oh, things, they're not telling the truth, etc. So they've had a conversation with a buyer who has said they're going to show up and then they don't show up. Then they don't return phone calls. I don't know what it is about humans. If you're not interested in a property, just say you're not interested in a property. Or the other side of the coin is if you are interested in a property, don't do the funny buggers. Don't think you're smart. Actually say, yes, I'm interested in the property, particularly if it's going to auction. You don't have to say what your budget is. You don't have to give any other information about you, but just be genuine and say, yes, I'm going to come along to the auction. And I'll tell you why, as a buyer, this is a smart thing to do, because the high likelihood is that one day you're going to be a seller. And when the shoe is on the other foot, you will want to know who is there, who's coming along, basically who's in, who's out, who's a maybe, because you want to know that kind of stuff. So we do vendor advocacy as well, which means we sell houses for clients. And so I know what it's like working with a selling client when you have buyers who are wishy-washy and they're not telling you not telling you the truth, or if they're going to be there, not going to be there, all this kind of stuff. And so as a buyer, put yourself in the shoes of the seller to understand, because you're likely to be a seller one day. Understand what it's like. It's just courtesy. There's no need for the smoke and the mirrors. I mean, it's what people seem to do, and I don't understand why. So when we, as a buyer's agent, inquire on a property for a client, and if they've gone out and had a look at it, and for whatever reason it's not for them, it doesn't suit them, I will always ring the agent and let them know that we're not interested, we're not proceeding any further on the property. And if the client has given me some feedback, I'll pass that feedback along to the real estate agent. So sometimes that feedback is useful and sometimes it's just what it is. So if the feedback, for example, the client says, well, I don't like the location, the road is too noisy. Well, the real estate agent can't do anything about that, can they? But if it is something like that, they weren't happy with the state of the fence, for example, that's something that can be passed on as feedback to the vendor, and the vendor could make a decision before the sale, before the auction, to perhaps getting the fence repaired or get it painted, whatever they need to do. So it's just always helpful. And because I see things from both sides, from both buyers and from sellers, with working with both sides of the equation, I know what it's like for someone to be selling their home and wanting to get that feedback and wanting the likelihood of getting a positive result and a good sale. I also know the other side of the equation when we're working with buyers who are looking to buy a property and they have fallen in love with a home and they would really, really love to buy that home. So I'm just saying to you that whichever side of the equation that you're on, just be genuine, be honest with the real estate agents. You don't have to tell them everything. Like I said, you don't have to tell them your budget or give everything away. If you want to just play your cards really close to your chest, you can still do that. But you can still tell a real estate agent whether or not you're going to be there, whether you're interested or whether you're not. And please don't tell a real estate agent that you're not interested when you are, and when they ring and say that they're going to sell it to someone else and you go, well, and you don't believe them, and then it gets sold to someone else, go at them and say, well, you because that happens. You would not believe it how often that happens, where the buyer doesn't say exactly what they want. Honestly, to the real estate agent, they're playing, I don't know, they're playing chicken, that they think that the agent doesn't have another buyer there, which looks sometimes is the case. But if you are genuinely interested in the property and you're being told that it is going to get sold to somebody else, do not get upset if you've told the real estate agent that you're not interested and they've said we're going to sell it to someone else, or they say permission to sell. That's what they say, the permission to sell it to someone else. They'll do that through the auctioning. And you don't get it and you miss out, because that's it. The house is gone. So if you are interested in the property, you need to show that you're interested in a property. And if you're not confident with any of what I've discussed, then please come and talk to us. It's what we do here at Chamberlain Property Advocates. I love what I do. It's so much fun what I do. Working with clients it lights me up, because where we can help them take that next step, whether that's to buy or sell their home, it is so exciting. And the look on their face where they get to put that sticker on the board, it is what it's all about. So if you need a hand, if you're there, if you're listening and going, look, I'm really not confident with this, I haven't done it before, perhaps you're from interstate, overseas, and it's just not your wheelhouse, because it can be extraordinarily stressful, please talk to us, chamberlainadvocates.com.au, or you can reach out across all of our social channels. Just slip into the DMs there and just say hi and touch base, and we can have a conversation about what it is that you need to be doing to either be selling your home or buying your home. First home, next home, forever home, whatever it is, that's what we do. I absolutely love that. So auction time, I'm going to continue in another episode about various tactics when it comes to auction, because we talked today about the due diligence steps that you need to do to prepare yourself to be showing up at auction, and some tactics there. But there's a whole nother realm of things of how to bid at an auction, and I'll cover that in a future episode of Property Mama. If you're loving joining us on the podcast each week, please do share with friends, family members and colleagues, because I would love to get the word out to more and more people, because I am very passionate about what I do, and I am looking to just spread the word and educate people, as many as I can, in the world of real estate. Give us a thumbs up, a positive review, and would absolutely love that. Once again, Wendy Chamberlain, your property mama, and I look forward to you joining me on a future episode. Bye-bye for now.